Now we get to talk about ataraxia. The message of the third remedy in the Tetrapharmacon is, what is good is easy to obtain. By what is good, Epicurus has in mind happiness, or the goal of life. He agrees with Aristotle that the question, what is the goal of life, is the most important question we need to ask about our lives. But he has his own view about how to go about answering it. While Aristotle proceeds by identifying what is distinctive of us as humans, Epicurus's methodology is to identify the goal of our natural and uncorrupted impulses. That is, examining the natural behavior of infants will tell us what our goal in life is. And here's what he thinks we find when we, quote, visit the cradle. As soon as each animal is born, it seeks pleasure and rejoices in it as the highest good, and rejects pain as the greatest bad thing. That is, as soon as we are born, we, and every other animal, recoil from pain. Think of the newborn crying because it's hungry, or cold, or wet. We also naturally enjoy and seek out pleasures of the ordinary sort, but the highest form of pleasure, according to Epicurus, is this consciousness of freedom from pain. He says, we hold the greatest pleasure to be that which is perceived when all pain is removed. And it is towards this, rather than the pleasures like eating and drinking, that our primary natural impulse is directed. Now, to call this experience of freedom from pain a pleasure is certainly provocative. And there were many, both in antiquity and now, who would deny that this is a proper use of the term pleasure. But whether or not Epicurus is right to call it pleasure, he makes it clear that this is what he thinks is our ultimate goal in life. That's what newborns are seeking, and that's what we would continue to pursue as our ultimate goal in life if we weren't corrupted by our upbringing and society and develop all kinds of false beliefs about what is good. To appreciate what is involved in reaching this goal, let's look at a memorable summary of the doctrine from the Vatican sayings. The cry of the flesh is not to be hungry, not to be thirsty, not to be cold. There's your crying newborn. For if someone has these things and is confident of having them in the future, now that's not the newborn anymore, but could be an adult like you and me, he might contend even with Zeus for happiness. So Epicurus here invokes two very different kinds of pains. There are those the body incurs when its natural needs are not met, if it needs food, drink, or shelter. Then there is pain or distress of the mind, fear that you won't be able to satisfy your hunger or your need for drink or shelter. The pains that make the greatest difference to our overall state of pleasure or pain are the mental ones, Epicurus says. Think of it this way. If you've worked up a good appetite from a long hike and are still miles from home, where you are expecting a hearty meal, your overall experience will be a pleasant one. You won't be paying much attention to your feelings of hunger because you have no worries about whether you will be able to satisfy them. By contrast, if you are not enjoying the hike and are worried about where your next meal is coming from, that is, if you have mental distress on top of the bodily pangs of hunger, then your overall state will be one of distress. You will not be, as Epicurus says, confident of having these things in the future. So the moral here is that the most important thing for achieving an overall experience of freedom from distress is to work on the mental component, which Epicurus calls ataraxia. Note his indication at the end of Vatican saying 33 that ataraxia is the condition of the gods. Of course, we can be worried about other things than whether we are going to be hungry, thirsty, or cold. We can worry about whether the stock market will crash, about whether you'll get the job or the promotion you want, about whether we will have a room with a view, or whether there will be a place to get a decent cup of coffee. But these are worries about things we can't control. And so long as we care about achieving these things, we cannot eliminate fear and worry from our lives. We cannot achieve ataraxia. But ataraxia about these uncertain things is still within our reach. All we have to do is rid ourselves of our desires for them. A desire, as Epicurus conceives it, is a longing that is painful when it is unsatisfied. It involves caring about whether we get its object. Once you desire something, you need to get it, or else you will be distressed. Now, Epicurus's point in saying we should rid ourselves of these kinds of desires is not that we should aim at austerity, but rather that we should be prepared to be content with austerity if that's all that's available. And then if the opportunity for indulgence comes along, we can enjoy that too. If you don't have your heart set on a room with a view, you can still get full enjoyment out of the view if your room happens to have one. You can get maximum enjoyment out of a sumptuous meal, provided you didn't have your heart set on fine dining. As Epicurus says in the letter to Menoikeus, we believe that self-sufficiency is a great good, not in order that we might make do with few things under all circumstances, but rather so that if we do not have a lot, we can make do with a few, being genuinely convinced that those who least need extravagance enjoy it most. Raphael Wolff has offered a nice example to illustrate Epicurus's point about enjoying extravagance most when you need it the least. Suppose a modern Epicurean is booking a flight across the Atlantic. The Epicurean will not need to fly first class and will be content with a coach class ticket. Still, she'll be very pleased if the airline upgrades her ticket to first class and will thoroughly enjoy the extra legroom and the fine food. But she won't miss them at all if, as is likely, she remains in coach class. Compare her situation to that of the person who prefers to fly first class and hates being stuck in coach class. He too will enjoy being upgraded to first class, but his enjoyment won't be as great, according to Epicurus, once you add in all the aggravation and distress that come from worrying about whether he'll have to stay in coach class. Epicurus's basic advice about how to achieve ataraxia in life is that we should be as limited in our desires and as flexible in our actions as the Epicurean traveler.